All right, so today I want to thank you both because we have had a crazy week at the high school. I know there's been lots of stuff going on in performing arts, and myself, I've had two different field trips where we've been unable to do this at the school. So, uh, to my supervisor and the person that is going to be reviewing this video, I apologize that we could not do it in the school, but these are two school employees that took time out of their Sunday, especially Super Bowl Sunday, to still make sure this video could happen. So I am Dr. Aaron Willis. I'm one of the deans of students at Avon High School, and I am a student in the principal preparation certification program. And I am here with Caitlin Steckbeck, who is our theater arts teacher at Avon High School, and also Grant Steckbeck, surprisingly, her husband, who is one of the social studies teachers at the high school. So some norms that we're gonna have for this meeting is we're gonna keep comments as constructive and professional as possible. I know it's a Sunday, and I know that sometimes we're just like, I'm just gonna say what I want to, but we want to keep it as professional as possible. We're definitely gonna make sure we stay focused as possible, and we're gonna be positive just to make sure that this is very important data, and also it's very sensitive data due to the nature of it being that it's reflecting various subpopulations of students at our high school. So we work at Avon High School, which is a high school in Avon, Indiana, which is about 10 miles away from Indianapolis, Indiana. It serves grades 9 through 12, and we have about 3,400 students to be exact. It's like 3,338. And our purpose of this meeting is to go over the needs assessment of our campus and to see what does our data tell us about where do we need to put our most effort and where do we need to really intervene as quick as possible, may it be through behavioral data, attendance data, and our academic achievement data. So let's go ahead and get started with that. I'm going to share my screen, and please let me know if you're able to see it. All right, is everybody able to see the screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, so right now, we're just going to start with the overall attendance data. Okay, so at Avon High School, with having this many kids, and this data is also from the 2019-2020 school year. So with that being said, COVID affected our data, but not much, because at this point, everybody at that point in time was said that they were in attendance when they might have not been in attendance. And so the data for attendance from the 2021 school year is not available until later by the end of this school year. It's always like 1 year off. We are very, very below the state average at 2.8% of our students show chronic absenteeism. And so that's actually like really, really good. And compared to the state average, we are well above it. So about 81.4% of our students actually are showing to school every single day. They're not chronically not coming to school. But then when we look at our data based on subpopulations, I mean, as we can see, our Asian, Black, African American, as you can see, if there's little dashes like this, that means there's not enough students, because Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, there's only 2 students at our school that are actually that demographic. Native American, there's only 4. Hispanic was quite high, which is interesting because there's under about 200, about maybe 180 Hispanic students. And now our white population of students, which is the majority, 3.6% of them were chronically absent. And so now for us, in terms of the needs assessment, we need to understand with our white students, which is the majority, what is the demographic within that subpopulation of students. And so I think we all know and see that there is various arrays of, white students at our school. You have the very affluent, you have the very poor, and you have the middle class. I guess I would just want to know what are your thoughts when you see that number of 3.6% for chronic absenteeism?
Well, my question is it 3.6% of all of Avon's absences are white, or it's 3.6 of the white population?
That's a good question. That's actually a good question. So from what I'm understanding is it is 3.6% of the chronic absenteeism.
Okay.
Yeah.
So of the chronically absent white students,
Mhm.
or chronically absent students, 3.6 of them are white.
Yes.
Percent of them are white. Okay.
Correct. Yep. So, with that being said, I mean, 3.6% of that, it doesn't seem like a lot, but I'm guessing if we're talking about, I mean, 3.6%, and if we're talking about 3,400 kids times 2.028, so you're talking about like maybe like 100 students overall, and then out of that 0.036. So really, out of that, we're talking about like maybe 3 to 5 students in that population of kids has been chronically absent. So now chronic absenteeism means like they've missed over like 10 or more days of school. But now that's the 2019-2020 data. That makes me wonder, would our data be way different now due to COVID, which I can guarantee that it's going to be 1,000 times different from last school year and this school year. So now as we go down to the subgroups, I think we break it down even more. So remember the number that we had before for the chronic absenteeism was 2.8%, right? And so now we look at some of our very broken or very tight-knit subgroups. So we got our economic disadvantage, English learners, our high ability, and our students with disability, which of course our high ability students come to school. We already know they're going to come to school. But our economically disadvantaged, English learners, and students with disabilities. And so I was wondering, when you guys see that, what do you think?
Well, initially, my assumption of just, my 9 years of teaching is that when families are economically disadvantaged, they have less resources. And if you have a teenager who can do things for the family now, they can babysit, they can take care of people, they can drive, they're much more of a young adult free resource in the house. They might not have anything wrong with themselves, but they're at home taking care of something else in the home because they are, the young adults in the household, and they might not have the support. And I think that too, a little bit with like English learners, my upbringing coming from a very multicultural area, my friends that were English learners, like their community is very limited. Their family is very limited. So they too have less resources because they don't have all of their aunts and uncles and grandparents and all of that here to be able to help with things. So that's just my first thought for those, not necessarily the same issue with each of them, but that idea of resources.
Yeah, and I think the same can be said with students with disabilities, as far as, kind of prioritizing, or the parents or the families prioritizing, the doctor's appointments, or like they're having the students are having a bad day, depending on the disability, whether it's behavioral or more physical or something of that, or emotional. It may be a thing where they've decided it's better for the student to be at home. But I think it also has to do with the resources all around, with all of the categories: economically disadvantaged, English learners, and the students with disabilities.
Yeah, I know when I look at this, the first thing that comes to my mind is, in many of these like subpopulation groups, many of them are minority students. And so in terms of this needs assessment, I mean, especially at Avon, because our population is changing so, I mean, drastically. Like, I mean, this is not the same Avon back when we were in high school, which would have been like 2008 to 2010. I mean, back then the school was predominantly white. Like, these numbers would not have had this. Like, there wouldn't have been English language learners. There wouldn't have been as many economically disadvantaged. Not saying there would have been students with disabilities, because I mean, that transcends all ethnicities and things like that, because I mean, there's many students, no matter what demographic you are, that are going to have IEPs and VIPs and things like that. But I think these numbers are now becoming higher because we are going from a school that at one point was 80% minority or 80% white and 20% minority to a school that is now 58% white and 42% minority. So I think, so I think a lot of these numbers are going to be a little bit different because I mean, you are serving a new group of students, and with that comes a higher, and there's a lack of resources that are available to them, especially when it comes to, I mean, when it comes to chronic absenteeism, it's the fact of having a vehicle. I mean, you now have seniors that usually in the past would be driving cars that are now not driving to school. Like they take the bus from the time they are kindergartners all the way until they graduate high school.
Mm-hmm. And I also think too, you know, how you said about, you know, disabilities, it doesn't matter your background, you can be born with a disability, but those are, I think, commonly are going to be the kids that don't, for lack of a better term, like enjoy school. Like they come to school and it's like a challenge, and not that they find, you know, excuses or, you know, I'm not trying to say like, oh, they're bad kids, but like if you go someplace for 40 hours a week that you don't feel confident, you don't feel strong, you're challenged, like you are more likely to find a reason to not go, or to, you know, it's the same whether it's school or going to the gym or going to like things that you're supposed to do but you don't really want to do. Like I think it's human nature that kids that don't feel confident in school don't want to be there, you know?
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. I mean, and to be honest, when it comes to students with disabilities, I mean, I think we all know the data, and I mean, scholarly writing will show you in research that students in minority populations are overly tracked to have IEPs. And so that makes me wonder, looking at that number, which is kind of hard to break down due to just like, I mean, different number of kids. I mean, some of these kids have been there, some of them have left and things like that. But I mean, overall, you are now talking about, excuse me, you are now talking about, this could be close to 100, 200 students that have been tracked incorrectly, but because they've been tracked incorrectly of having disability, now their number for disabilities is showing in this chronic absenteeism. So I think there's lots of things to be said with chronic absenteeism. I mean, we can use this data point, but I don't think this data point is a true indicator of the needs, especially because our data number, our point is 2.8%, which is even lower than the corporation, you know, chronic absenteeism, which is scary to me to think that, okay, so ours is 2.8%, the corporation's 3.7%, what is going on at the younger levels? And so now I'm wondering, because of the 2019, 2020 data, looking at the other schools, you would see, okay, these kids are moving up. We are now getting that, those populations of kids that are chronically absent. And so our number is probably going to be up. I wouldn't be surprised if we're at like 5% this year.
Did they stop tracking attendance as accurately once? So this is the 2019-2020 school year.
Mm-hmm.
So once we went into the shutdown, and Avon High School was the first to shut down in Indiana, once does this data have include that, what, 2.5 months of shutdown of online learning?
Yeah, it does. It does have the data, but to be honest with you, during that shutdown, I mean, there was no continuity among schools on how to actually track kids for being in attendance. Pretty much, as long as you were enrolled, you were present. Everybody, as long as you were enrolled, you were present. And I can't remember. So Avon was the first in Indiana, but I think, wasn't Avon the first in the nation to shut down as a school?
Pretty close. Yeah, we had a middle school student brought it to school, and so we were shut down for just that Monday, and by the afternoon they were going to do a press conference, and I was like, whoa. And then Jennifer McCormick, our superintendent, the state superintendent of schools, was at this press conference, and I'm like, this is not good. And then by the end of the week, all my other like friends that were, so that was Monday. And by like Friday, everybody else went on 2 weeks off, and then we just never went back. So we were the first by like 5 days, a week, a full week. So it's not like we blazed a huge trail, but that's solely because we had a positive case in the school. And then that student had siblings that went to various other schools. And yeah, it was rough.
Man. No, I understand, but it's funny how you said like, well, we were the first, we were number one, we were number one, shut down the rest of the schools. No, but I mean, it's just interesting because we're gonna make a good point. It's like, I mean, using the attendance data from the 2019-2020, it's a little bit difficult because we were gone. Like, I mean, literally, like we were gone. We weren't even there for that last part to see what could happen. I mean, to be honest with you, these numbers could have changed at the end of the school year. I mean, with seniors too. To be honest with you,
that's what I was going to ask.
First thought is senioritis hasn't fully kicked in yet. Post spring break is rough with kids because they've gotten into their college, or they've gotten into whatever, they've taken their tests, like, and there's not much more we can hang over their heads. Like, they know that. So yeah, this is good because it's probably our best, 2/3 of the school year, 3/4 of the school year. It's that post spring break where it's just like the natives are restless.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess why I brought that up is just like, could that have skewed the data? And if that's the case, is there a way to track that specific the data coming from those specific months?
I mean, we could. I just don't know if it would actually be. I mean, I definitely
or
think
if it'd be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't know if it would actually be helpful because the problem is, I mean, and also at that point, it was very subjective, meaning that I know many students that have said like, yeah, like I was being marked a certain code during e-learning and I was there the whole time. Like I was doing stuff. I mean, I was working all day, but I still got marked not in attendance, or I got marked this, or I got marked this. So I think the issue was, or really it still is, when we do go e-learning and stuff, is there wasn't one code that basically said, hey, this student is working. I mean, it's up to them to get the work done. And I think the problem is during that point in time, it was like there was so many different codes going around. No one could do anything. I mean, parents were still calling their kids in sick during that time. Like, why are you calling your child in sick? No one is at the school. Everybody is okay. It's all right. But because they needed a code, they had to pick something. They had to put something in their code.
Well, if I remember correctly too, it was like there wasn't a set procedure for how kids checked in. It was like, if I post an assignment and they are supposed to get it done in 24 hours, let's say, if they didn't do it, they get a 0 and you weren't in attendance for e-learning because you didn't do it, which was like a whole nother thing of like, teachers, it would make sense. They would do like one biology help session for their 6 courses or whatever. But then kids are like, I can't do this now. I have my biology Zoom. And it was just the time and the structure of, when COVID hit, across the globe was a mess. So it's like, okay, does it really count if the kid did e-learning at this time, or they did it a week later,
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, everybody's just literally trying to survive. Like that was the mindset. And, I even had times where like I would personally go to like Kroger and kids are there working an 8-hour shift during like the school day. Like go at 3:00 when the school day's over or whatever, I posted, and they've been there for 4 hours, but you can't really say anything because who knows what's happening at home. Maybe dad or mom's lost their job from COVID and little Timmy bagging groceries is paying the bills, So
Mm-hmm.
I think that goes back up to what we're talking about attendance with being in, a low economic, category or E&L learner, whatever. It's just when times are tough, like when you can't, your priority isn't your high school attendance if you're trying to keep the lights on, you know?
Right. No, absolutely.
I mean, I think that can also reflect to the data point of our the economically disadvantaged as well. I mean, COVID probably or not probably, but definitely exacerbated that issue. But like looking at that data, the going to school is not the priority when it's, you know, your family or leaving the lights on.
No, absolutely. So thank you guys for that discussion on absentee data. Definitely not the heaviest of the data points I'm going to use. I think our last two data points are probably more, will give us a little bit more of an insight of where the focus needs to be for this needs assessment. So the next would be student achievement. So because our testing accountability is continuously changing from, we went from iStep to iLearn. Now we are using the PSAT, SAT data. So this is the 2018-2019 overall school year data, which is our performance data from the iStep, which is our means of understanding where our students are at. So when we're looking at this, we have our English language arts proficiency. So the state average is 50.9%. So Avon was at 75.9%. So 75.9% met or exceeded the grade level standards and expectations, which is pretty good. Mathematics, whew, right?
Jesus.
Yeah, so we were at 43.7%, which 25.3% was state average. Now biology, which as a former biology teacher, I will tell you, the science proficiency does not actually count against the school. So we're not going to focus on that test, but we were above the actual state average. So that's great to see. So we're going to start with English language arts proficiency, because I know both of you have a pretty good background in English language arts. I would say it's very proficient. It meets standard or exceeds it, whichever way you want to see it. So remember, our number for Avon High School was 75.9%, which was our corporation as well. So our corporation is, I mean, we're rocking a good C right now. That's good. That's great. So looking here, 79.9% in our ethnicity groups. As we can see, white was 80.8%, Asian 73.3%, multiracial 68.8%, Hispanic 68.2%, Black African American was 62.3%.
I feel like this data doesn't, and this is like obviously statewide, it doesn't help anybody if we just got this kid. Like, I would rather see data of how many years you've been in Avon schools. If you've been Avon since a kindergartner and you're in 10th grade and you're not passing English, that's an us problem. But if you just moved here last year and you came to us as a 4th grade level 10th grader, like we, you know, unless like a Lifetime movie moves in, like we're not going to be able to have you jump leaps and bounds. So like, just from my perspective of, you know, the past 6 years I've been at Avon and the kids that are moving in, like we're doing our best to get kids to grow. But my kids that moved to Avon, they're not white. They're not white English speakers. They are of all the different ethnicities, different languages. And it's great that their family has chosen, like it's to come to us. Like it, you know, says something about what we're doing, but this data doesn't reflect, you know, 10th grade data is not truly reflecting what they're learning in middle school and freshman year and all that if they didn't go to Avon, you know?
Grant, what do you think?
I mean, I have to agree with Caitlin on that as far as the reflection there. It's definitely below the average. What, can you go back to that state average for the English language arts?
Yep. So that's state average
the
is 50%. Yep.
Okay, so it's definitely good that they're still above the state average. I think this can also, I mean, kind of go back to the discussion about resources and whether or not those Black African American students, the Hispanic students, the multiracial students, those students of different ethnicities have the same resources within uh, at home or within their communities that can help them at home as in addition to at school. Um, so yeah, that it to me, that's kind of what that looks like. Um, yeah, yeah,
Yes.
that's
Well,
what I got.
also on top of that, these four groups are the kids who are most likely speaking another language at home, or
Yeah,
they
Mhm.
grew up hearing another language. So if you count their exposure to English, hours wise, it's lower because but when you look at just this test, you're like, oh, well, they speak, less English or worse English,
Mhm.
whatever, reading, writing, all that. But I think holistically, like as a very white woman who only speaks English, like, man, like I wish I spoke Spanish. I wish I spoke so many of these kids are speaking multiple languages that, you know, post graduation, I think it's more beneficial that they could speak English and Spanish, even though they have sacrificed what 4%, 5% of their
Mhm.
percentage of their English skills. What is the actual call for college and career readiness? Is it being 100% on an English test or being 80% with
Mhm.
Spanish English? So, I mean, that's just the westernized version of education. But yeah, I look at those four and I think of some of my students. I was like, well, of course they're not as strong of English speakers, readers, writers, because they are exposed to multiple languages at home. It's not a deficit, that it's a positive. We're looking at it as their parents only speak French, Spanish, Creole. I've had in my class. And it's like, no, it's like cool. So I think it's so common to think that there's this disadvantage when really like they're kicking our kids' butts when it comes to the foreign language departments.
Yep. And so I guess so. What you're saying is, so we're just worried about just I mean, this is the common sense of the high stakes tech, the high stakes testing. But at the end of the day, is it truly better for our students and actually more beneficial for the college career readiness to have that multilingual aspect of themselves? Because I think sometimes we take, like you said, this data here is almost taking away and making it seem like, oh, you're not good enough or proficient, where in the real world it's like you are truly college and career ready based upon the assets that you already have.
and also
Mhm.
according to the data, they're still what at lowest 12% more proficient than the rest of the state.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's still not a like a kick in the seat. Yeah, so especially if they're speaking multiple languages. Um then yeah, I mean, it also can be a time thing. Like, isn't iStep is, correct me if I'm wrong, timed, where you have a certain amount of time
Right.
on these sections, and if you can't finish it,
Mhm.
so some of these kids are probably translating from English into Spanish or whatever language they're speaking, and then back into English or something of that nature, depending on um how they're looking at it, how their brain works, and how truly proficient they are with English. It may not even, it's not an accurate reflection of their intelligence or even necessarily proficiency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this test it's playing the game. We're playing the game. We're doing the tests they told us we have to give. We're trying to get the numbers they want us to get. But at the end of the day, like when these kids apply for jobs, even if they don't go to college, they're not going to ask them, what was your ISTEP scores? They're going to want to know that they speak multiple languages or that they come from different backgrounds, like that they have more to them than just like the average bland high school student. But
Yeah. And then, shoot, honestly, one takeaway I have from this and one thought I have: how many of these kids are in upper level English classes that aren't white? And
Mhm.
that's a question for another day, because if we go through our school and look at some of our upper level English classes, maybe speech, etymology, let's see, what's another one? There's another
The
AP
B
Lang,
classes and the AP classes.
the
I would
AP
say dual
Lang,
credit.
dual credit, or like even BU history and all those, like in the upper level classes, what majority of the kids are in them? And so if you're in those upper level classes, and sometimes when I think about honors and AP and all those, I know they're rigorous, but I also think in those classes, you do get more resources and more instructional strategies for you to learn that I think sometimes you do in lower classes.
I mean, at very least, I'm remembering back to when I was in high school, I would utilize my peers in those classes and use them to help me study, and like more so than I would in the other, I don't know, the normal class. I don't know how else you'd put that, but like the regular curriculum, I would like use my friends to say like, oh, they're really good at this. Can you help me?
Well, that goes back, that, is direct, almost very similar to how Montessori schools work, and how if you do Kagan cooperative learning, like that the kid that's just a little bit above this kid is going to pull this kid up, like how you strategically partner people. If you partner a kid that's at an 80% with an 85 or 90% kid, they are going to learn from that student. And then that upper level student also learns because they are, like, in a way reteaching or like reiterating the content that their teacher already taught them. Just
Absolutely.
it off of Grant, but yeah. So I think this data, when I think of like our Avon admin and our teachers and stuff, like we see it and we want them to be better in English, to have as many skills when they graduate from Avon as possible. But I don't think anybody at the school would be like, well, they speak multiple languages and that's a detriment to them, or they come from multiple, they have various culture exposure and code switching and all that. Like, I think when you look at it not on paper, the perception is different.
Absolutely. And then, looking at our economically disadvantaged, our English learners or students with disabilities, I mean, we kind of already knew where the data was going to point anyways. In terms of this, high ability, look at that, 94.3%, but we had that idea that's going to happen because the majority of the high ability students at our school are white. Economically disadvantaged English learners and students with disabilities, majority of them are minorities. But I know I look at the students with disabilities of 16.1%. I mean, you're talking about students that are, cognitively struggle. Some have dyslexia, some have ADHD. So, I mean, I'm not surprised it's that low, nor am I surprised the English learners one is that low as well. I am happy, though, to see that the economically disadvantaged was almost at 60%. Like, if we're talking about in terms of a grade, like economic disadvantage overall is literally almost passing. So that is a plus compared to it being like a minus. Yes, is it below the school average? Yes, but is it above the state average? That is also yes. So I think those are really good takeaways. I mean, do you guys have any takeaways from that at all?
I mean, like you said, the students with disabilities and English language learners is kind of expected in that capacity. With iStep, they have they do the breakout rooms with their like they cover their IEPs and their
Correct.
504s and stuff like that.
Yep. For accommodations.
Yeah, their accommodations. So then I don't know. I guess the accommodations only can help to affect so much. I guess the 16% seems low to me. English learners, you could have kids on any scale with the WIDA, like after taking the test and having 1 through 5, you could have somebody who's an English learner that is at a 4 or 5 who is understanding English pretty proficiently, or at least Sometimes on those tests, it's like you get a 4 and you are understanding English in a conversational way, like person to person and interpersonal relations, but your reading comprehension is at a much lower level, say like a 2, um, that would reflect that data there. But yeah, I'm happy that the economically disadvantaged is where it is. It's surprising to see that. It'd be nice to see it higher, but it's also nice to see that it's definitely above the state average and only just below where some of the other proficiencies were that we were just looking at, the racial proficiencies. So
Yeah. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to move over to mathematics, which brace yourselves, because remember, state average was 25.3%. We were at 43.7%. 43.7%. So looking here, there were 2 subpopulations that were above the 43.7%, and that was Asian and white. And then, of course, multiracial, Hispanic, Black, African American were below it. And as we've seen in both English and mathematics, the Black African American subpopulation has been the lowest in all of the academic categories. And so, but the question is, though, where we are in Avon, Indiana, we are surrounded by a bubble of schools that are in Indianapolis, like right on the edge, where we do get a lot of those transfers in. And so now you're talking about, is this the Avon school system that is not preparing these students, or is it the move-ins that come in and then now we are trying to pick them up? And so I think Ms. Steckbeck, you bring up a really good point of we are now taking on these students. And I'm not saying, oh, we're taking on students that can't learn, no, they know how to learn. It's a question of, did the school system they were at before do what they were supposed to scaffold their love of learning? And so now
they want to learn,
yeah,
or their families do care because they picked up and moved. Like,
yep.
It's not that they're these awful kids that, whatever. It's like, this was a choice to come here, whether the student liked it or not, but still, like, they have a family who is involved. I think sometimes it's like the cop out of education, like, well, their families or their parents. And it's like, no, these are the ones that actually like uprooted their lives for their child, But I also would say it's kind of hard. I mean, is there validity in this test? Yes. The breakdown, it's pretty consistent, but it's also kind of hard to take this test at full value when the state average is 25%. Like, there's something wrong. Like, the bigger picture doesn't make sense. So you're saying 75% of schools are failing their students.
Yeah,
like, there is this disconnect there. So
yeah, I mean, yeah, very, very much so. Absolutely.
How much validity can we put into a test that we already know is not accurate per se?
Yeah, no, I think I agree with that too. And I think in terms of the state average, I mean, Black African American is below the state average, but then I also think in majority of corporations and schools, that's the demographic that's always going to have the lowest score. It doesn't matter where you go in the state of Indiana, Black or African Americans usually going to have the lowest score. Well, excluding schools that are like very large, predominantly African Americans, like a Maryville High School, a Ben Davis, Lawrence Central. But even then, they still are going to have low scores for their Black or African American students, because I just feel as though there is a lot going on in education. I mean, overall, in terms of the needs, education was not designed for African American students. It was not designed for Asian students. It was not designed for Hispanic students. It was not designed for multiracial students. And so now I think in education, we are now undigging and upheaving a system that was not designed for anyone that was not in upper echelon Caucasian male or female. Like, when you look at the normal school, when they first were made in the early 1900s, it's like you would just see little Susie and Johnny and all them with their little, dresses and shoes, and they hadn't like,
Lunch.
washed their, little lunch pail that was like as strong as like a 1976 Cadillac. No one was, it wasn't designed for all these ethnicities to come into play. And with that, I mean, you have various different, like, you have so many factors. Like there's so many factors that come into play. You're talking about socioeconomic, you're talking about trauma. I mean, you're talking about cultural aspects that you're not going to be able to get past, but you have to try to find a way. And so that kind of gets us to now with our student groups. I mean, still our student with disabilities, English language learners are still low, are economically disadvantaged yet again. I mean, they might be below the state average, but I mean, they're right there. And if you're talking about the state of Indiana, you're talking about a very rural state. Our state is very rural. And so with it being rural and having urban like epicenters in various, like it really in the four corners of the state and actually in the middle, you're going to get a lot of economic disadvantage with that. So I mean, the economic disadvantage is going to, I mean, not run the roost, but they're going to make up a majority of the kids that are in the state. And so the fact that they're almost at the state average, I mean, I will take that. Absolutely, I'll take that.
I mean, I think these test scores are just a drop in the bucket of issues, like we can't holistically look at these test scores and then you're breaking down what education was in the early 1900s. Like, how have we treated these groups of people? And it's like, well, we've treated them like trash for, all of time. But then we look at them and go, well, why can't you score as well as everybody else? It's like you're not going to run the race as well if you already have weights attached to your ankles. When your grandparents weren't allowed, your grandparents, great grandparents weren't allowed to go to a high performing high school, like that has ramifications that trickle down into your, talking about resources and exposure to, academic texts or, books at home or all of that, the mindset of education. If you're generationally, your family has had a horrible interaction with school, you're going to most likely inherit those mindsets. So we can't it's hard because, obviously present day teachers are trying to fix that, but we don't have the years on our side of undoing, systematic oppression that we did for decades. That is proven to be true. How our schools are districted to today,
Gerrymandering.
Yeah.
Sorry, just going off what you said, Caitlin. Yeah, some of these students, grandparents, and even grandparents and great grandparents weren't even allowed to go to school or weren't even allowed to go to have an education. So it's just kind of like that they're playing catch up already and they have to keep doing so. But back to kind of what you were saying, Aaron, about the economically disadvantaged, you'll take that. I mean, it kind of points to the efficacy of Avon's system, that they're able to keep those students at that level at least. At least in my mind is what it looks like. So I just thought I'd mention that.
No, that's a really good point. I didn't even think about that. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And thank you guys for your comments. And so now this last little piece of data we're going to look at. So we've looked at attendance, we've looked at academic achievement. We would look at growth. The only problem with the growth model is because we're switching, and I think this is also another thing that Caitlin brought up, with these tests. Every year that we've been in education, there's been a new test every single year since we've been in it. Since we've been in it since 2012, 2013. There's been a new test every single year. And so with that, how can a school get baseline data when they can't compare it from year to year and look at the various different subsections or questions? That's the reason why this data is very vague, is because it can't be broken down by grade and gender to compare it to the following years, because the data the test always changes. And so this is a very they look at the student groups, because I think one thing I would love to see is, like what Caitlin said, who's moved in, who's moved out, male, female with a disability, male, female that's economically disadvantaged or in certain ethnic groups. I just feel like we can't get that because the tests are continuously changing each every year. So hopefully
Oh, sorry.
no, I'm just saying, I'm hoping that with the PSAT, that because it's outsourced to the College Board, we can get that data and we can actually pinpoint into what question has been missed, what subgroup of student is actually missing that question.
And I was thinking too, Indiana keeps just changing and changing and changing. Well, then how do we even compare it to other states
Yep.
who are constantly changing? Yes, different states are different ways, but like, I just don't think kids 2 hours east or west of us are, they could have drastically different educational experiences, and that's who their actual competition is in life when they're trying to go to college or the military or whatever. Those are international entities. Like us comparing Avon to Brownsburg or Avon to Plainfield is like a small target.
And to be honest, I don't even think we can even compare ourselves to those schools anymore, because we're nowhere near those schools. And in terms of needs, ours is way different because we are the closest school to the Indianapolis belt of 465. And now we are taking on the school of, we are a melting pot. Like, our school looks like America without a doubt. You walk through our school, it is the United Nations. We have everybody and everything in terms of, if you're looking for which I would say, even with these scores, if you're looking for a true multicultural experience, then Avon is the place that you probably will want to be, because you're going to get a actual glimpse of what the real world looks like.
And then as a family, scoping out a new place for your kid to go to school, and you see that exists in this particular district and not in the others around it, why would you not move there? You know what I mean?
That, and not only that, but it's like it exists and is doing well, much higher than the state average across the board.
So I mean,
yeah, kind of a no-brainer.
Yep, I think that's it's a great point. And finally, our discipline data. So this discipline data is going to be very, very, let me break this down for you all, because it can be very shocking to see. Can everybody see this? I'm sorry, it's a little bit small. Okay, so this is the discipline data from this year. I was able to use this year because I was, looking at the achievement data and the attendance. I was like, we're talking about almost 2 to 3 years ago, which that data is still, still has some reliability. But one thing for the needs assessment that I think is going to be conducive for what is going on really in our school is determining who is being disciplined. Because when someone gets disciplined, that means that they're either disrupting their instruction or they're losing their instruction entirely because they're being taken out of school or taken out of their learning setting. So as you can see from this data, you have our ethnicities, you have the total population of that ethnicity in the school, and then the percentage of the population of that school, of that population. So as we can see, our white students make about 58% of our school, and then the next subpopulation that makes up the most is our Black or African American. So let me explain this. So percentage of discipline. So looking at, and you can see down here, I have different tabs, the unique incidences. So let's say if you or Caitlin gave a teacher minor for technology and you gave a student after school detention for it, that means that incident for that student could only be counted once. So if you gave that student that same type of incident again, it wouldn't be counted in this number.
Gotcha.
So that means this is not the total number of referrals. This is the unique incidences.
So the individual student.
Yes.
So they could do it once, so they can be a frequent flyer, and
Correct.
they equal the same.
Correct, because we're not going to keep, because if you count each and every individual incident over and over, it's just going to oversaturate it. and it's not
Mhm.
going to give us a true picture of what's going on. So looking at this would make sense, right? So you see that white make up the majority of discipline, or percentage of the discipline given that quarter. But now let's go over here. So let's do it by unique students, right? So 203 white students received discipline, but then 157 were Black. But then I want you to look at the total population of white students versus Black students.
Mhm.
And so then you can take that unique student number, because that's saying that an individual Black student uniquely got disciplined at least once. And you can then divide that number by the total population. And you can see in quarter one and quarter two, about 24% of Black students were disciplined, whereas white students, it was about 10 to 11%. So you are 2 times more likely to be disciplined as a Black student at our school than you are as a white student.
But again, I also wonder too, because a lot of the feedback I've gotten from my students who move in is that Avon is more strict on certain things, which in my interpretation is because we can be, you know, our biggest problem is not discipline. It's not, we don't have the Indianapolis school problems that a lot of those schools do. So again, I think, I mean, I for sure believe that there are teachers that do not see their own bias 1,000%. But I also wonder, of that 37%, how many of them have moved in? And this is like a culture shock of like, this is how Avon runs. You will have, you know, I had a kid a couple weeks ago move in from Pike, and he's like, the teachers are nice here. The teachers don't yell at us here. And it's like, well, we have different classroom set. We have different demographic. Like, we can't just say like, yep, we're just so nice. We're so nice than those Pike teachers. Like, no, we have a different environment that we teach in. So when you only have 1 or 2 kids that are doing inappropriate things, you know, speaking as somebody who has worked for a large MSD school, as opposed to half the class, you're still teaching, you know, what feels like common sense in a classroom, like, then yeah, it's different. So I wonder, of our discipline altogether, break it down into 2 categories or however many categories based on how long have you been in Avon? Are you K through 12? Are you middle school through high school? Are you high school on? Or, you know, what is our discipline breakdown? Because I think that can definitely be a cultural thing more so than just a race. You know, I would be interested to see that data too. Again, I do think there are plenty of teachers that are skewing the data, which is horrible and unfortunate. But, you know, I also wonder if some of these kids are on the fence and they're finding out the hard way, like how things go potentially.
Can you scroll down to the 4th quarter?
Oh,
We
you're
haven't
talking about
Isn't
the
it this
semester?
year?
Say it again.
If this is this year, Aaron or Grant, there isn't a 4th quarter. We haven't gotten there yet.
Oh,
There's a
this is
3rd
this
quarter.
year. Oh, I thought this
Yeah.
was.
So yeah.
Oh, okay.
So this is this year, and so I'm happy you said scroll down, because like, oh yeah, we can get there now. So looking at this, I mean, this is our semester 1 data. So the one thing that's interesting, right, with that unique students I just talked about. So a student in any population could have gotten disciplined 1 time in the 1st quarter, but they may have not gotten disciplined in the 2nd quarter. And so I know when some people have looked at this, they're just like, well, the numbers don't add up. Well, they're not supposed to add up, because it's not an add up. It's a kids have added, they either have been taken off or they've been added on. So at the end, so as you can see, like in unique students was 157 here for Black and 155 here. Someone's like, well, shouldn't those 2 numbers add up? No, they should not add up, because the add up is what students were actually disciplined. So at the end of the day, there could have been like altogether 30 kids could have been knocked off, but then 30 different kids got added on, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so looking at this again, I mean, for our semester 1, like it's even more interesting, because at the end of the day, I mean, we still have 34% of our Black population is being disciplined, which to me is the true purpose of this needs assessment, is to come through, and we know that our Black or African American population and our Hispanic, multicultural, and Asian, and really all our minority groups are most of our economic disadvantage. And overall, they are being disciplined at a much higher rate than the majority students. And so that's why having some type of intervention, may it be a group or groups for these minority students, is very important, which I know that I've been working on now, and that'll be something I'll be bringing up in the next video, so be on the lookout for that. It's something that I think is important to build skills in some of these kids to be successful, but then to also see, do these actual groups, which are response to intervention, actually help, where they can actually be in groups that will build them up and support them, social emotional learning, and also just academically, but I totally get what you're saying, because I think it is a question. How many of these kids are actually started in Avon? Because I mean, at the end of the day, once they come to Avon, they're Avon students. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But like, who actually started here? Because the grades that most kids move into Avon are 5th, 7th, and 9th grade. 5th, 7th, and 9th. The majority of kids that move into Avon are 5th, 7th, and 9th grade. So at those, I mean, those are like pivotal years in school. Like, I would have been mortified had I had to move somewhere in 5th grade. 6th grade, I mean, I did move to a different school. Moving in 7th grade, that would have been difficult, because you're now starting over again. In 9th grade, you're starting over again. So if they move in at those times, I mean, those are startovers every single time.
Do you feel like, I mean, it's like the age-old question. If you had the answer to this, you'd be a billionaire. But it's just so hard to see it, because it's like, we look at this data, we see these things, but at the end of the day, like, if you have a Black student who's not doing what they're supposed to be doing, you're supposed to discipline them. But then you feel this, like, I am the white teacher that is now disciplining the Black male. Like, you almost sometimes feel like you're feeding into the problem. And so what, do you keep up the expectation, or, it's just a multi-layered issue? For some teachers, they need to do it one way. For other teachers, it's like, what are you individually doing, and what can you be doing or should you be doing to combat this?
I think the biggest thing that has to happen, which right now I know, like, we're working with a group of teachers on looking at this discipline data. A lot of things that students get written up for are very subjective, and they're not objective. Tardy's technology violation, objective. There's no like if, ands, or buts. You're on your phone, you were late. But to say someone was disruptive, insubordinate, defiant, non-compliant, that is very, very, very subjective.
And very cultural too.
Huh?
Yeah.
It's cultural too.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that we as a school have enough, or not have enough, but have the appropriate implicit bias and or multicultural education, or like re-education within the district for professional development? Do you think that has been keeping up with our student population?
It is not. And I will tell you, we've done professional development on it. I feel as though we should have done a tad bit better last year with our professional development on it. But I also understand we were at a point where we all were not allowed to get together. And And I really do think that we have to revisit that at some point, because if we don't, we are doing our students a major, major, major disservice. Because right now, I think teachers are tired, administrators are tired, attitudes are very high across the board. And I think it's sometimes being taken out on the students. And unfortunately, due to many of our teachers not looking like the students. I mean, we're talking about a school of 3,400, but there's only like 7 or 8 like minority teachers. A lot of the minority students are taking the hit in terms of that. Now, bad behavior is bad behavior, regardless. I mean, that transcends culture, ethnicities, subgroups, everything. But I also think we have to look and listen, because the discipline data is telling us the story, and our kids are speaking to us through their actions. They're speaking to us. So like, they're giving us nonverbal cues, sometimes verbal, sometimes verbally bad, but they're giving us nonverbal cues of there is something more going on that you're not getting, that this class right now is not going to do for me. Now, sometimes it's just pure laziness, but I also think we do have to understand the cultures and the different ways that our students work. And I think until we get that point, we're going to have discipline data like that. And until we can take some objectivity or subjectivity out of our discipline, then I'm not going to lie, many of our minority students are going to be affected by it, because culturally, many of our minority students are just loud. Like my voice is loud. I'm bigger than people. People are going to be intimidated by me. So the minute I speak up or raise my voice, I can come off as scary when I'm not actually a scary person. So.
Do you think it's almost a communication breakdown though, a bit? I mean, I have found more success with students if, instead of, I don't use the discipline terms of like, you're being disrespectful. I would repeat what it is they're doing, like, I am teaching up front and you are playing a video game on your Nintendo Switch, and that's not showing respect to me. And you're not supposed to be doing that. You know what I mean? Like, to break down what it is that they are doing. Cause I've had kids before have said like, I don't see, I've said like, well, you're being rude. Like, how am I being rude? I don't feel like I'm being rude. So, well, I feel like when you do this, this, and this to me, that is rude and disrespectful. And she goes, that's how I speak to my mom. I didn't know that upset you, And it's like a communication breakdown of like, you are being louder than everybody else. I can hear you across the room. I need you to bring it down so other kids can think. And they're like, oh, okay. Like you're not just like, you're loud. Like, you're explaining why what they're doing is not like collectively helping the whole. And I have found, even though it takes a second for me to like explain it, where I'm coming from, it no longer just comes off. It's just like, you're making me mad kind of thing.
No, absolutely.
The one particular student, has become my buddy for, I don't know, for supposed to be like what's the word? We can't share names or whatever. But, he said to me once, he's like, I think you don't like me. I was like, it's not that I don't like you. It's that when you get up and you walk around and you don't sit down, you raise my blood pressure and you give me anxiety. I just need you to sit down and do whatever it is you're doing. Like, it was during student resource time, so it's a little different, but breaking down where my frustration comes from, he has completely changed that behavior because he now knows what it is that he shouldn't be doing. And it's nothing personal. It's the fact that he's walking a lap into the auditorium because he's just walking around,
No, I mean, that's great insight. I really appreciate it. So I think in terms of the needs assessment moving forward, I think based off this needs assessment report, and I can just see that, I mean, we have to have these groups that are actually in the process right now, but really focusing in and looking at their academics, and really pinpointing and looking at their behavior too, to really understand and figure out where is the disconnect between our student and our school as a whole, and actually working on the handbook to figure out, can we get some more objectiveness instead of subjectiveness in terms of discipline. So when they do come down to the dean's office, or when teachers are getting ready to give them discipline, it's just like cut and dry. There is no, well, you did this, so I'm gonna do this. And then they come down to a dean or somebody, you're just like, wait a sec, that doesn't seem like you should have gotten in trouble for it. And then there's that power struggle between the student, the dean, and the teacher, because the more non-ambiguous things are for everybody, the more likely kids will understand what they are and aren't supposed to do. Now, mind you, kids are gonna do what they wanna do, but it gives us a say for that we are trying to make this as easy and as straight to the point for you as possible.
Mhm.
So does anybody have any other last minute thoughts or questions, concerns for the good of the order?
Nope, not for myself.
Nope. Well, I want to thank you guys. Well, thank you both so much for being a part of this video and helping me achieve my dream of receiving my principal certification. Thank you so much. I hope you both have a wonderful Sunday afternoon and have fun watching the Super Bowl.
Go sports.
Go, yes, yep, go sports ball.
Sporty hoops.
Yep. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.